If you enjoy what you hear here today, please consider supporting me on my Patreon page. Every dollar helps, and you get to see content that you won't see here. Chapter 19. More.
So that brings the total count of fillies having weird visions from 2 to 3.
Rainbow remarked with a small frown, looking around the restaurant booth at the pony she was with. Rarity was presently seated directly across from her, awestruck by Celestia's mere presence and attention. Celestia, upon her arrival at the scene, had asked the owner of the nearest establishment to let them handle this discussion inside the building, for the sake of privacy and the ease of mind of Rarity. The little filly had enough on her mind, Celestia wagered. Discussing this matter in public would only make that worse. Besides them, Twilight Sparkle sat next to Rainbow, who herself sat next to Princess Celestia in one of the main booths of the restaurant. Rarity and her parents sat directly opposite of them, each looking either confused, concerned, or in the case of Rarity, both. Numerous questions had been asked once they had been seated, and, for good measure, Celestia had ran a rudimentary scanning spell over Rarity to ensure she was mentally and physically sound. She was. Now she couldn't bring herself to meet the eyes of the ponies before her, fidgeting anxiously in her seat. Twilight was the one to break the silence.
What I want to know is why us?
She said with a thoughtful look on her face.
What's making the three of us have these weird visions? What's the pattern?
Celestia furrowed her brow in thought before closing her eyes. After several moments, she opened her eyes and looked directly at Rarity.
I hope you can forgive my use of a faux pas, but Rarity, how old are you? Huh?
Rarity looked up at Celestia with a confused twist coming onto her face.
That is, Your Majesty, I'm 11, but I'm afraid I don't see how that's relevant to this phenomenon.
Celestia nodded slowly, impatiently.
I ask because the only other two ponies I know of who have had these visions are 9 and 11 years of age. Those are, as you know, my daughter and Twilight Sparkle, respectively.
So it's only happening in foals?
Rainbow asked with a tilt of her head. She then flopped back in her seat with a frustrated sigh.
That doesn't exactly narrow it down by a whole lot. How does that even make sense?
Celestia shook her head slightly, her frown growing.
Without more examples to draw a clearly defined pattern from, it doesn't.
She lifted her eyes to meet those of Rarity's parents.
But with all three of our current examples existing in fillies, around your age range, it at least gives us a starting point, a common thread we can use to find more examples more easily.
It was at about this point that Rarity's father opted to speak up. With all due respect, Princess, just so I know for sure, our darling Rarity here is fine? These vision things won't hurt her in any way? Celestia shook her head with a comforting smile.
Rarity should be fine. It has been over a month since my faithful student's first flash, and, much to our combined relief, she is none the worse for wear. I have no reason to believe it will be any different with your daughter.
The atmosphere on the other side of the table visibly relaxed, the family sharing a relieved embrace. Celestia smiled softly before nudging Twilight so she could get out of her seat.
With all of that said, I believe you have no need of the appointment at the mental health clinic.
Rarity grinned widely in gratitude, nodding her head happily.
Thank you, Your Highness. It was my pleasure, Miss Rarity,
Celestia said with a small play bow, earning a delighted gasp out of the little unicorn. There was an air of ease and a rapid loss of tension, one which every pony was happy for. For a moment, Celestia smiled at them before turning to go, Rainbow and Twilight swift to follow.
May I trouble you for just a moment longer?
Rarity abruptly called out to them while hopping out of her seat. The three ponies turned to face her while she cantered directly up to Rainbow Dash.
Now, I mean this with every ounce of possible respect, but what happened to your mane?
Rarity glanced up to the aforementioned messy mass of prismatic hair, her eyes crossing slightly as she did so.
What are you talking about?
She asked in confusion.
Well, it's just got it,
Rarity said, her reservations with being in the presence of royalty swiftly fading away at the crime against main cuts before her eyes. While it was nothing new to Twilight Celestia, or even Rainbow herself, said mane was a disaster, to say the least from Rarity's point of view. Uncombed, only barely trimmed. Whatever shampoo had been used that morning had been rendered completely obsolete and useless by layers of sweat and extreme blasts of air from high-speed flying. It was like a rat's nest.
What's the big deal with my mane? It's how I like it.
Rainbow pointed out bluntly before puffing out a breath that caused a stray lock to go out of her face.
What?
Rarity squawked in alarm before reaching out and grabbing Rainbow's head, so absorbed in her fabulosity episode that she completely forgot that she was grabbing royalty without permission. Her parents cried out in alarm and fear at this, but this soon gave way to uneasy chuckles when Celestia herself began struggling to hold in an onslaught of delighted giggles.
Hey, let me go! Get out of my hair, would ya?
Rainbow whined in protest, trying to fly back and away from this crazy filly, but Rarity's own hold with her hooves was remarkably strong.
Disregarding that shameful pun, I will be out of your hair just as soon as I have fixed it.
Rarity declared as if it were some solemn duty sworn by oath. It may as well have been, for how tightly she was holding Rainbow's face.
Twilight Celestia, little help here.
Rainbow pleaded, gradually being pulled down to the floor by the determined white unicorn. Celestia simply laughed openly, no longer able to contain them. Twilight, however, didn't respond at all. She watched the occurrence blankly, her eyes going distant and unfocused. Rainbow noticed almost instantly that Twilight was completely unresponsive.
Rarity, I mean it, let me go! Now!
She snapped before swatting the other filly's hoof away. Rarity gasped in surprise from the smack before she realized what was happening and what she had just done. Instantly, she blushed profusely. Rainbow didn't care, though, cantering up to Twilight, whose hind legs had just given out, causing her to fall to her haunches. Rainbow looked her over and gave Twilight a gentle shake.
Hey, Twilight, you alright in there?
She asked carefully, worry in her voice.
She's having another flash,
Celestia said in realization. Immediately, the entire room went silent, anxiously awaiting Twilight's waking mind to resurface. As they waited, every pony couldn't help but curiously wonder what the lavender filly was seeing right now.
Beautiful.
A much older Spike whispered in awe and amazement from Twilight's side, looking past the checklist in his claws with a red tint slowly coming over his cheeks. Twilight didn't notice this at first, trotting forward into the large, central room of a well-decorated building with a rustic architectural style. Her mane bobbed around irritatingly on top of her head from how poofed up it was, but she was determined to just get this over with.
Get what over with?
Twilight asked herself with curiosity as she watched the vision play out before her.
Yes, the decor is coming along nicely. This ought to be quick. I'll be at the library in no time. Beautiful indeed,
she said out loud and meaning it wholeheartedly. Whoever was in charge of the decorations for the Summer Sun celebration this year had done an amazing job.
Not the decor.
Her, Spike said while pointing past Twilight at a pearly white unicorn who was currently looking through an enormous collection of various ribbons of different colors and sizes and materials. Upon her flank was a cutie mark of 3 masterfully cut diamonds. She frowned slightly while moving a gold ribbon up and looking it over with a critical eye.
Rarity,
Twilight thought in shock as she saw the unicorn in question.
No.
Another came forward, this one blue.
No.
Another, green.
No.
She carried on like this, while Spike stared on, the red tint in his cheeks growing exponentially.
Oh, goodness no.
How are my spines? Are they straight? He asked abruptly while touching his claws to the spines on the sides and on top of his head, straightening them out as much as he was able. He then gazed ahead at the unicorn as if he was in love. Twilight simply rolled her eyes at the little drake and trotted closer to Rarity.
Good afternoon,
She started, only for Rarity to cut her off.
Just a moment, please. I'm in the zone, as it were.
Rarity said before finally settling on a red ribbon with sparkling materials all across it, tying it to the support pillar in front of her.
Oh, yes. Sparkle always does the trick, does it not? Why, Rarity, you are a talent.
She then gradually turned to Twilight.
Now, how can I help you?
Her innocent inquiry turned into a panicked shriek. Twilight blinked in confusion.
Oh, my stars, darling! Whatever happened to your coiffure?
She asked in shock, as if she were gazing upon some horrifying disfigurement or wound.
Oh, you mean my mane?
Twilight asked, supposing she should have known this one would happen.
Well, it's a long story. I'm just here to check on the decorations, and then I'll be out of your hair. My hair? What about your hair?
Rarity asked before hopping down and jabbing her horn into Twilight's back, pushing her along with great purpose.
Wait, where are we going? Help!
Twilight asked in growing concern as Rarity pushed her out of the town hall, Spike dutifully following along with that love-struck expression never once leaving his face. Twilight snapped back to reality and shook her head to clear away the fogginess in her head.
Oh, whoa, that one was a bit more vivid than the first one.
She mumbled groggily, putting a hoof to her head and rubbing circles into her temple.
You all right?
Rainbow asked abruptly, shaking her friend with very gentle movements.
And what'd you see?
Twilight shook her head one last time before glancing up to Rarity, who instantly perked up and looked away as if to find some other pony that Twilight may be looking for. Twilight then pointed at her.
You, Rarity. I saw you, oddly enough. It was like we were meeting for the first time, but we were adults. Like in the other hallucinations.
Celestia's brow furrowed in thought.
What was it that caused this flash? What event here sparked it?
She asked firmly. Twilight thought for a moment.
It was when Rarity started fussing with Rainbow's mane, I think. Around the time she said something about fixing Rainbow's hair is when it happened. I guess my mane was kind of messed up in this flash because Rarity wanted to fix it immediately upon seeing it.
Every pony shared uneasy glances for several long seconds. Celestia's horn lit up, a medical and mental scan spell swiftly going into motion. Twilight turned to her, mouth open, but Celestia beat her to the punch.
I searched for any magical energies in you that were foreign, and I found one. What did it tell you?
Twilight asked hopefully, leaning forward slightly with an eager smile growing on her face. Celestia shook her head and ended the spell, satisfied that Twilight would be all right.
Nothing, I am afraid. The foreign energy was faint to a point that if I had tried to prod it for its origin point, I would have broken it. I don't know how these flashes link with the mind while they are in progress. If I had disturbed it, it may have caused severe disorientation, or possibly even mental damage. I am not willing to take that risk with you.
She then looked to Rainbow Dash.
Either of you.
Rainbow sighed along with Twilight before helping her back to her hooves. Twilight nodded in thanks before glancing up at Celestia.
Well, at least now we know one pony can have more than one.
And how does that help us exactly?
Rainbow asked with a frown. Celestia smiled confidently.
It means we may yet have more opportunities to discover the source of these flashes.